Well, well, would you looky here. Forbes just recently came out with an article a couple days ago that basically says and backs up exactly what guys like me and Blackbond have been telling these PC gaming socialist clowns since day fucking one. For those living under a rock and are unfamiliar, Forbes is a business-based magazine and internet publication that has been around for over 100 years. So needless to say, they are very credible and esteemed in the world of business. With that being said, let's go over this article entitled Sony's Greatest Asset is Bigger Than PlayStation 5, Bigger Than Consoles. My oh my, I wonder what they could be talking about. Quote, why do you buy an Xbox instead of a PlayStation? Sometimes there's a difference, like $100 or the Xbox One's ill-fated commitment to Kinect. But in the modern era, the two machines are starting to look awfully similar. At times, one is more powerful than the other, but they're both usually in the same ballpark, and it's tough to actually tell the difference. For many, it comes down to what they want to play, and that's not going to change when we get the Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5. Unquote. I don't know about you, but that heavily implies to me that while there are other aspects that can have an influence on what gaming platforms you buy, at the end of the day, it comes down to what games do you want to play. If you want virtually nothing but multiplats, get an Xbox One. If you want multiplats and a good library of exclusives, you have a choice between PS4, Switch, and PC. And on PC, you have more choices still in the form of Steam, GOG, Origin, Epic, Uplay, etc. Imagine that! The games being the #1 major deciding factor in which gaming platform would be the best thing for somebody to get based on their own needs and preferences. Quote, over the course of the last generation, Sony has made clear that its exclusive development competes only with Nintendo, and it gives the ecosystem a massive edge. Right now, we think in terms of a console war, and we see what that development can do for hardware sales. We've seen that work, but I think people sometimes forget that this edge can push non-hardware platforms as well. As we continue to speculate about a cloud-based future, I think we need to remember how powerful exclusives can continue to be. Unquote. In reality, Sony is competing with all the gaming platforms, including the PC. But I can see why this author says they're only competing with Nintendo, because in the console space, Sony and Nintendo are the ones that have exclusives. And what's this? He says that exclusives not only sell hardware-based platforms, but non-hardware ones as well? On the surface, that seems to be talking about PC-based digital platforms, which instantly brings to mind the whole thing between Steam and Epic. But then he throws in the aspect of the whole cloud gaming-based future, so I'm curious to see where he's going with this. But just to set the stage for the rest of the article, he ends this paragraph with, I think we need to remember how powerful exclusives can continue to be. It's almost as if this guy is talking directly to these PC gaming socialist clowns that deny the value of exclusives, say they're bad for consumers, and who want to get rid of them. Quote, Sony is not just the company that makes PlayStation. Sony is the publisher of Bloodborne, God of War, Uncharted 4, Spider-Man, Horizon Zero Dawn, Death Stranding, the upcoming Ghost of Tsushima, and The Last of Us Part 2. And, most importantly, Knack. It has established itself as the preeminent source of a certain kind of expensive, parentheses to develop, parentheses, don't know why there's not a space there, involved single-player game. Call them prestige games, whether you like them or not. Unquote. So basically, Sony isn't just a hardware manufacturer, but a game publisher and developer as well. Yep, that's accurate. I think he singled out Knack sarcastically because virtually nobody would put that over the previous games he mentioned. I've never heard the term prestige games before. The industry name for them is AAA games, and if they're exclusives, the secondary unofficial name is system sellers, but okay, whatever. Continuing, quote, "As we move forward into a new era of gaming, whatever that era might be, this is going to be Sony's greatest strength. This is true even in an industry focused more on cloud than on console, in an industry where platforms divorce themselves from individual pieces of hardware, or one that works basically the same as the one we're in now. That's because Sony's content has become massively valuable in and of itself and will continue to be no matter how it's distributed." Unquote. This next generation could be the make or break gen as to whether or not we're ready for cloud gaming yet, as Google has already stumbled and fumbled with Stadia. Honestly, if Google couldn't do it, I find it hard to believe that Microsoft is going to be able to do it either. Microsoft might be ever so slightly more qualified to move us in that direction than Google, but I don't think it's a large enough margin to really make any difference. Anyway, that line of Sony's content has become massively valuable in and of itself, that right there perfectly sums up the value of exclusives. If they're good enough, exclusive brands, products, and services take on a life of their own. It's the reason why Nintendo has had more longevity than any other gaming company on the planet. They have Mario and all his cast of characters, Link and Zelda, Samus, Donkey Kong, Pokemon, Star Fox, Kirby, F-Zero, Fire Emblem, Animal Crossing, Punch-Out, the Mother series, the list goes on. Sure, some of these properties and characters wind up on other platforms, usually mobile ones, but they're Nintendo-owned properties, so most of the time, they're exclusive to Nintendo platforms. And back in the 8 and 16-bit eras, they had a massive amount of third-party exclusives to boot. At one point, games like Castlevania and Mega Man were exclusive to the NES. Now let's look at Sony. They have Kratos, Joel and Ellie, Nathan Drake, Sweet Tooth, Ratchet and Clank, Jak and Daxter, Sly Cooper, Horizon Zero Dawn, Infamous, Little Big Planet, Killzone, Gravity Rush, and some of the characters and franchises that Sony is doing hardly anything with, like Siphon Filter, Ape Escape, Medieval, Starhawk, Toomba, Legend of Legaia, Colony Wars, Legend of Dragoon, and to a lesser extent, Parappa the Rapper. Hell, at one point, they had Crash Bandicoot all to themselves. The PC still has probably over 3 decades worth of exclusives to its name. What does Microsoft's Xbox brand have? Master Chief and Marcus Phoenix, both of whom aren't even exclusive to Xbox platforms anymore? I mean, seriously, what more do they have? What? Fucking Blinks the Time Sweeper? True story. The title character from this failure of a franchise was originally supposed to be the mascot of the Xbox brand. So yeah, out of all of these platforms, take a wild guess at which one sticks out like a sore thumb and is constantly coming up as the loser of the platform wars. If exclusives can take on a life of their own, like the author of this article is basically saying, you don't think they have just as much, if not more, influence to sell platforms than hardware, services, and features, all of which don't have the same individual value that the exclusive franchises have? Quote, "The value of content here is not only hypothetical, because the video streaming industry offers us a possible glimpse into what a cloud-focused gaming future could look like. There's no such thing as hardware exclusives in the streaming wars, and there never has been, because I can watch Netflix and Hulu on basically any internet-connected device on Earth with a remarkably low barrier to entry. Low enough subscription fees, no need for a controller, simple, straight-ahead apps, etc." Unquote. Even though hardware isn't a factor when it comes to movie streaming services, like the man said, exclusives still are. Exclusive movies and shows are what entice consumers to potentially get one streaming service over the other. But if these PC gaming socialists have their way, none of these companies or industries would have any sort of identity or differentiation all their own, and everybody would have everything to achieve a terribly misguided sense of balance and pro-consumer business models. Now, I already know that the PC gaming socialists will hone in on the whole no such thing as hardware exclusives in the streaming wars bit as justification to prove their point and basically be like, that's the type of model we're advocating! No more holding games hostage to inferior hardware! Except for the fact that the man already made it clear that exclusives work in virtually any type of gaming industry scenario, whether it be digital streaming platforms or hardware-based platforms. Besides, y'all still complain that Epic has timed exclusives when you're already playing on the best hardware simply because the Epic Store doesn't have the same feature set that Steam does. Which, by the way, when it first came out, had the same bare-bones feature set the Epic Store has now. Maybe it's not a good idea to try to compare the feature set of a platform that's been out for a little over a year to a platform that's been around for 16 years. As a result, even if all the platforms become digital on one beast-ass piece of hardware, y'all fucks will probably still find something to bitch about. Quote, and yet even in that situation, exclusive content remains not only relevant, but central. Netflix spends literal billions on original content, and just recently Disney launched a new streaming service that hinged a huge part of its publicity on a single high-budget show, and it paid off. That's the power of premium content. Unquote. 100% facts. Yet according to these PC gaming socialists, just because that's the way it is doesn't mean it's right and how it should be. No, actually, that's exactly what it means. It's funny that they use that excuse, yet they argue in favor of the 30% cut Valve gets from game sales when compared to the 12% Epic gets because that's the industry standard, not taking into account that it's industry standard for all the other platforms because said other platforms also have hardware to sell, whereas Valve doesn't. But hey, there I go again, expecting PC gaming socialist dipshits to have consistency and keep the same energy. Quote, you could argue that the sorts of games Sony tends to make are not the most popular games in the world, and you'd be right. People, on the whole, spend more time with titles like Fortnite than they do with titles like God of War or even Spider-Man. But the analogy holds true here too. People spend the majority of their time on Netflix watching shows like The Office and Friends, but prestige content like The Irishman gives the service a sense of premium identity. That's how it works for Sony too. I probably spend most of my time with comfort gaming, but PlayStation is the only platform with Bloodborne on it, and that lets me know where I am. Unquote. I actually have to correct him here as Bloodborne is now also on PC via PS Now. Everything else he said is rock solid though. Exclusive content, services, and products giving a brand its own market differentiation identity isn't just how it works for Sony and Netflix. It works for pretty much every capitalist-based company and industry on this planet. Quote, there's a reason Microsoft has been buying developers like candy recently, and that's because it knows how important content is going to be in any future. Unquote. Well, given the fact that they've also said to not expect exclusives for the first year or two, that has to be seen to be believed. But hey, PS3 didn't have a whole lot of high-quality exclusives its first few years, so we'll just have to wait and see. Quote, that we are on the verge of a larger shift in the premium console industry seems inevitable. It started, arguably, with the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X, with both Sony and Microsoft blurring the lines of the console generation to non-existence, particularly with the backwards compatibility of the coming generation. The next major wrinkle will be the onset of cloud gaming as genuine competition to the premium market. The whole sector feels stilted after Stadia's awkward launch, but it's still on its way. I still expect premium consoles have a good number of years left in them, but things are most definitely changing. Unquote. I don't have any real commentary or criticisms on that, so let's just move on. Quote, right now, premium content serves Sony's hardware business and it serves it well, but it could easily be adapted to a radically different landscape. even one where cloud gaming somehow managed to totally eclipse local hardware. It's not impossible to imagine Amazon, flush with data centers but still carrying a limited understanding of the gaming industry, teaming up with Sony for a strong streaming service. It's even not impossible to imagine Sony and Microsoft teaming up in a world where Google or Amazon have evolved into stronger competition. Unquote. Notice that first sentence? Right now, premium content serves Sony's hardware business and it serves it well. It's not the hardware that serves the hardware business, nor is it the services and the features. It's the premium content, aka the exclusives. And like I showed in my retarded exclusives or anti-consumer argument video that I'm likely going to have to re-upload because it's one of the best videos I've ever made, this isn't a new thing that Sony just discovered and pioneered. The NES pretty much completely dominated the console market in the 80s, not just with first-party exclusives, but tons of third-party exclusives as well. The NES even sold more units than the Sega Genesis during the first 2 years of that system's existence because of the exclusive lineup, despite the NES's inferiority to the Genesis in terms of hardware specs. The SNES and Genesis were in stiff and intense competition with each other because of each system's first and third-party exclusives lineup. So if exclusivity wasn't a problem then, how and why the hell is it one now? What? Because standards have changed to where exclusives supposedly have no place in gaming anymore? Obviously, the standards haven't changed that much, seeing as how the PS4 and Switch, the platforms with exclusives, have outsold the Xbox One, the platform that has virtually no exclusives. The Switch outselling the Xbox One especially proves how valuable exclusives are, not only because of how inferior the former is compared to the latter in the realms of hardware, services, and features, but also because the Switch has only been out for less than half of the time the Xbox One has. So obviously, this whole notion that exclusives no longer have a place in the gaming industry because of changing standards is absolute bullshit. And according to the guy who wrote this article, standards changing to the point where exclusivity no longer has a valid place in the industry will never happen. I'll take this author's clearly qualified statements over the unqualified dog shit PC gaming socialists shit out of their mouths on any given day. And finally, quote, "The point is that over the years, Sony has built an arsenal of developers and IP to rival even Nintendo, with its own sense of style and identity. Right now, and for the foreseeable future, the company will leverage those developers to sell more pieces of physical hardware, but that's not the only way they can be used. Sony's premium content will serve it well in any number of hypothetical futures, because ultimately, gaming comes down to games." Unquote. Oh man, thank you, Dave Thier, you magnificent bastard. And the cherry on top of this sundae is the last part of his full bio, in which he covers that whole gray area that happens when technology and consumers collide. What is it that these PC gaming socialists always like to say? Something about exclusives being bad because it forces consumers to buy inferior hardware, i.e. inferior technology? Sounds an awful lot like a collision if you ask me. It's almost as if this dude wrote this article specifically to own these PC gaming socialists. But hey, maybe I'm reading too much into that. Regardless, here we have a prestigious and acclaimed business publication confirming everything I've been saying about exclusives' ability to sell platforms and the value they bring to said platforms to be 100% factual. What now, PC gaming socialists? Huh? Come on, what do y'all dumb fucks have to say now? Let me guess. That author and you are corporate shoes. Forbes is a shitty and disreputable source. Duh. Yeah, okay, you keep living in that delusional autist socialist fantasy world of yours. Even with any potential shortcomings and controversies, Forbes has far more credibility to talk about how business works and how business should work than all of you clowns put together. You all as a community either don't have a clue of how basic business and capitalism works, or you just don't care and don't respect either one whatsoever. No matter which door y'all choose to open, you know the rest. Honestly, as good as this article is, it's rather sad and pathetic that in this day and age, an article like this even needs to be written to explain something that's basic common fucking sense. That's all I got for today. Depending on how things transpire regarding a specific issue I've been dealing with, you might get another video sometime next week about something completely unrelated to these PC gaming socialist clowns. We'll just have to wait and see. For now, though, the Great Exposer has spoken.